Hi there. Let's wrap up our lesson on the trunk. So far, we have discussed how sensory information passes along unipolar neurons, sensory afferent neurons, through the peripheral nerve, spinal nerve, dorsal root, and finally, it's going to synapse with an interneuron in the dorsal horn. Usually, these interneurons carry information up the white matter tracts all the way up to the brain. Okay, so essentially telling the brain what was just experienced in this particular dermatome or this particular muscle. Okay, this is what normally happens. Note that reflexes don't stop and ask the brain for permission, right? So we don't have this step right here before there is an action produced. We don't actually tell the brain first and wait for a decision. Instead, the sensory information immediately elicits a motor response. Okay, so very important distinction between normal central nervous system processing and reflexes. Okay. And so information is passed up these white matter myelinated tracts of neurons. The brain makes a decision, right? And then the brain is going to send down a decision and at the appropriate part of the spinal cord, right? So if we have like some like neck muscle response or some, arm muscle response or something over here, this decision is then relayed to a motor neuron within the ventral horn. And so the sensory information is relayed in the dorsal horn, sensory, and then motor information is relayed in the ventral horn. Motor neurons then pass out of the spinal cord via the ventral roots, okay, and join together with the sensory neurons here in the spinal nerve. Remember that the dorsal roots are only sensory information, the ventral roots are only motor information. And so if you have a dermatome that can feel, but you can't actually control, or you can't feel, but you can still like control that particular strip of skin, then you know that either the ventral or dorsal root was damaged. Okay, so the spinal nerve is going to pass out to the rest of the body, right? Whatever muscles, skin, bones, whatever in this region. And the motor neuron here in green is going to synapse with with muscles, right? Muscle cells. Remember, a motor unit is all of the muscle cells that are controlled by a single motor neuron. And so here, this motor neuron is controlling all of these different muscle cells with one single action potential. Okay. Once again, spinal nerves contain sensory and motor. Dorsal roots contain just sensory. Ventral roots contain just motor. Interneurons are in between. Synapses occur within the gray matter. The white matter, these are myelinated tracts, which are carrying long distance information to and from the brain. Okay. Remember that we can tell the difference between the dorsal side and the ventral side, therefore sensory versus motor side, because the unipolar sensory neurons are their neuron cell bodies are grouped all together in this bubble here called the dorsal root ganglion. Okay. I've mentioned this before, but Dave is a nice mnemonic. The dorsal side is afferent, the ventral side is efferent information. Afferent approaches, efferent exits. Right, sensory and motor. Okay, just another way of showing you this. Again, the central canal contains the cerebrospinal fluid, which is circulated by the actions of the ependymal cells. The gray matter within the spinal cord is broken into different regions, and we'll see this a little bit more at the end of the semester as well. But there are regions where the sensory neurons bringing information about the somatic system, so your musculoskeletal system and your skin, and regions where there are synapses for the visceral organs, right? So here's where synapses occur, bringing information about the heart, about the lungs, here, up here with the somatic, bones and muscles, skin. Okay. Here in the ventral horn, we have a big area where, synapses for motor responses are, for the somatic nervous or somatic structures, as well as the viscera or, heart, lungs, etc. Right? We can divide this, right, into the dorsal horn, the ventral horn, and here where there are regions for visceral communication, this is called the lateral horn. Okay. The white matter is divided up similarly, right? Groups of neurons carrying information to this part of the brain or that kind of part of the brain, or this type of information versus that type of information. There are white matter tracts grouped together as well. And so we're going to talk about this as our very last lesson this semester. But for now, the dorsal, lateral, and ventral horns. The shape of the gray matter butterfly is not the same from region to region within the spinal cord. In fact, there is considerable regional variation in spinal cord structure. In places where there are a lot more visceral organs, right, the heart, the lungs, the stomach, the liver, there's going to be a much more pronounced lateral horn. Again, the lateral horn is where information is passed about the visceral organs themselves. Okay, so the lateral horns are generally only present in places with visceral organs, not the cervical. We really don't have much going on up here in the cervical spine. But in the thoracic and the lumbar, there is a pronounced lateral horn. Okay, so only present in thoracic and lumbar regions. Also, the spinal cord isn't actually technically as long as our spine. Okay? Our spinal cord essentially stops growing when we're about 4 years of age, but of course our body keeps on growing long after that. So our spinal cord is only about the length of our spine when we were 4 years old. Okay, so as our spine continues to grow, essentially the spinal nerves have to keep growing and growing and growing, so they exit at the appropriate intervertebral foramen so they can go out to their appropriate segment within the body. Okay, so spinal cord stops at about here, like L1-ish, L2-ish, and what's left, right, below that, within your vertebral canal, is just a bundle of spinal nerves. Okay, so this bundle of spinal nerves is called the cauda equina. Equine for horse, cauda for tail. So this is literally your horse's tail instead of your spinal cord extending all the way down to the coccyx. One final set of structures for you guys. The spinal nerves split, they bifurcate. Bifurcate so that the anterior structures and the posterior structures can all be innervated. Okay, so here we can see the spinal cord within the spine. We've seen this image before. Here's the erector spinae, here's the rectus abdominis, and external and internal oblique and transversus abdominis. Okay, the spinal nerve exits right where we would think it would, below, for the most part, its vertebra of the same name, and it quickly splits so that some neurons go to the back and some neurons go to the front. Okay, we can see here just the spinal cord, dorsal and ventral roots. Here's the spinal nerve, and almost immediately in this case, the spinal nerve splits. This is going to innervate the back muscles. This branch is going to innervate the front of your body, the ventral muscles and bones and skin. So these two branches off of the spinal nerves are called the rami, right, for plural. The dorsal ramus, for singular, innervates everything on the back, so the dorsal side. Ventral ramus innervates everything on the front, right? So we can see here, these are actually the costal nerves, which are the ventral rami of spinal nerves T1 through T12. Okay. Other branches, right? So we not only need to innervate the erector spinae, we not only need to innervate these abdominal muscles out here, but also we need to innervate our visceral organs, right? So our heart, our liver, our lungs. And so these branches here, which again branch off the spinal nerve, they communicate with, they allow neurons to pass into these parallel nervous system structures. It's called a sympathetic chain of ganglia. So sympathetic, this is part of our sympathetic nervous system. So the rest, or sorry, the fight or flight system, which can ramp up our heart rate, it can increase how much oxygen we take into our lungs, etc. And so these are the communicating or sympathetic rami, which are communicating with these parallel structures here. Okay, so lots of new terms in this lesson. Hopefully this helped you to put together all of the different structures that are working together of the musculoskeletal system of the torso. Thank you guys for watching. That is the end of this lesson. See ya.